So Michael Turek is a freelance photographer based in New York City. He holds a degree from Rochester Institute of Technology. His photography focuses on documentary assignments and projects for clients, including the Financial Times, The Guardian, and the New York Times. His book, Contrails, is included in the MoMA archives and library currently, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So, Megan, if you want to start us off with a little elevator pitch
Yeah, we
of
figured we'd elevator it for you. Since I'm sure you've done it before. So, essentially, if you haven't seen the book, it pairs two perspectives of the same thing. So on one side, you've got a plane and its contrails, looking up from the ground. And then on the other side, you're looking at the inside of a plane. So really, we wanted to start with just when did it begin? When did the project begin? And what did it start as?
I had to do some research quickly in the last few days to figure out when I did start this, and it started. It never was a clear, concise moment where what the idea is now was like a sudden burst. It really was an accidental process, and I'm not embarrassed by that at all. It was sort of a real pleasure is how it came along. But the first thing that happened was I was just taking pictures of the contrails of like just of the planes, because and as I think many people do when you see really crazy patterns in the sky, and oh, that's pretty neat. And then over the course of the years, this is stretching back to the early 2000s, so nearly 20 years ago. I was in Rochester at RIT. I was spending a lot of time in parking lots, parking cars for a restaurant as a part-time job. And during those afternoons and evenings, I was doing nothing other than looking up at the sky and starting to take these photos. But over the course of the subsequent years, as I was on planes, wherever I was going, I was taking just photos inside the cabin. And it was only sort of an accident around 2005, 2006 is when I started making my first sort of commercial portfolios that I was showing to prospective clients. And this is where I discovered I had the sort of excuse I had now to go look back to see where I actually started this. And the whole thing started when I was just making pairs inside a much broader portfolio of just all kinds of photography. And it was just for one spread, the concept of contrail next to interior of a cabin. But there was no other harmony between the two photos like what the book is about now. It was really, the relationship was very far apart. It was just like, that's a cool contrail and that's an interesting detail in a cabin. But there was no rhyming, there was no sort of that reflective pairing that there is now. And I did that it was just one pair in a portfolio. And then about 6 months later, as the portfolio was always changing, I was like, oh man, I got another sort of contrail and cabin that I paired up that looked pretty good. And then this was where I started to have an idea like, okay, I could hone this idea into something more and take this out of this portfolio where there was portraits and there was landscapes and there's all kinds of other things. And that's where it really, the first idea of it all happened. And it was, again, just very accidental, but it was drawn from making printing photos and making a portfolio and putting pictures together. And then the idea came together, like as it stands now. And then it was like, this was a way to reflect, as you said, the whole idea about my fascination with this sort of idea of having two perspectives of the same thing. And then it became, all of a sudden, my mind was going and I had greater ideas about it. And I had a more intentional way about building these pairs. And then it became a project. And that's how it started. But that's going back, that was really, it was 2006 that it was like the first real pair as you see now.
And you mentioned how in the beginning for the portfolio, you just kind of put them together as in, this is from the inside, this is from the ground. When you started formulating the project, what did you start to think about when you paired them? What, you know, what were the relationships that you wanted to have between the two?
Well, at first I was satisfied with just the a picture from the ground up, and then inside the cabin, as simple as that. But that wasn't, I didn't know it at the time, but as I worked on it, it quickly became apparent that those early pairs, those early diptychs, just they weren't good enough. They just weren't that interesting. Or then I found that over the course of a few years of like very, I don't know, haphazardly working on this, it kind of revealed itself that you could find patterns that were similar on both sides of the pair. And it's like, okay, so this is starting to be a bit uncanny, these resemblances from one side to another. And then it was way more fun. It was just and yes, it was slightly conceptual about space and time and all that, but I have to admit, like, it's really half of it now. Like, it's just decorative. I like the way they look as just as an object, and that's fine too. So yes, there was always that concept and this sort of childhood fascination of like, whoa, it's so cool that you can look up, through 5 miles of air at a tiny little object, and you can't. I had a hard time comprehending all the details and the spaces inside those airliners cabins that you knew were there, but you couldn't see them, and then wanting a way to have both things visible at the same time. And that I satisfied that concept early on, I think. But then by adding a bit more of an aesthetic to the pairs, it became something more.
So taking a picture from the ground is a little bit easier in my mind in terms of what you're going to capture, right? You get the contrail on the plane, right? When you're inside the plane, what were you thinking about when you were taking the picture? Like, what did you want?
Well, I would say, and this is where like I will go on forever, and this is such a simple project, but I started to have rules, and I have a problem even with the title. Like at first it was Contrail Project, and this is Contrail, and that kind of does a disservice to it. But it's been around so long, or whatever, because as the book exists now, and all those pairs, in every contrail image there is an aircraft visible. It's not just the contrail. And because that was still, I was holding on to that original concept of I needed to see the aircraft where all those little passengers are hanging out in those spaces. So that was important. I didn't want to deviate from that. So that was one rule. Because there was a lot of other instances where you could have just an intersection of contrails, like older contrails that are 5 or 10 or 15 minutes old, and they're still in place in the sky, but the aircraft's long gone. That's too bad. I have, those are great sometimes, but I got to let those go because I've got to keep the plane.
Right.
I try to keep away objects on the ground, rooftops or telephone wires. Sometimes they make cool photos in themselves, but again, trying to be militant about a unity to these pairs, I have to apply some sort of regiment to it. As far as inside the cabin, there's so much. There's like so many crazy details, and I like, and of course, just sitting in your chair, but also going back into the toilet, like all these spaces that everybody knows. Well, people, it's a familiar space, and just being able to, like any public space, being able to detail or spend time with these spaces that are familiar but unexamined. I mean, hell, I almost felt like I could just do a series of just the interiors of the cabin, because now, I am relying, I do have some really great interior cabin shots. I probably have more interior cabins details than the contrails, because the contrails, it's actually there, you see them often, but you don't see unique ones often. But you can make unique photos inside the cabins much easier. There's all kinds of things happening. So yeah, the rule is, back to your original question, yeah, if there's amazing light, or there's amazing details, or you're on an older aircraft or a newer aircraft and there's new things, it's kind of interesting. Some of the pairs, some of the photos are really old, so you can recognize parts of aircrafts, the part of the seats, or the where you put ashtrays, which are, you don't have ashtrays anymore, and it's kind of nostalgic and it's fun, and you can see how these spaces are changing over the course of even 15 years.
So when it comes to actually shooting the project, what is your camera decision? What is your gear, your lens, your must have for this project when you're shooting?
For both cases, both sides of the diptychs, none of this is really planned. This is not a job, it's not an assignment. It's really all happenstance. The contrails, certainly, there's very little you can do to predict when that's going to happen. So the rule is, just have a camera with you all the time. And in that case, it happens to be mostly for me. I carry around a Leica-a, just because it's small, and that's not what I really shoot all my work on or assignment, because most of that's medium format and big. But I hate to say it, but when I'm walking around home or Brooklyn here, I'm not carrying a Pentax 6.7. So it's a smaller camera, 35 millimeter. The whole project is on 35 millimeter. And that was also another important point, that I wanted everything had to be unified. It had to be the same format. And again, I do have some images that were shot on medium format that were really good. I have a lot that were shot on digital that were really good. I can't use them. I don't want to. It's just trying to keep rules to it. And as far as the cabin as well, this gets a little techie, but one huge reason why I always have that Leica with me when you go on board planes is that you can always, unlike the or I should say this again, the reason I always have that Leica on board when I go on board a plane is that I have to go through the security, and every time you go through the security, you can't hand them the camera to X-ray. You got to take the film out so it doesn't get damaged. And with the Leica, it's really easy to, I'm doing it with my hands, you can't see it, but I'm rewinding it, and I can just pull the film out without rewinding the film all the way into the canister. And then I can reload it once I'm back on the plane. But when I'm shooting medium format, I don't think any of my cameras, and Mamiya or Pentax 6.7, if I'm halfway through the roll, I can't, and I go through security, there's no way to rewind a medium format roll and then put it back into the camera where you were. So again, it's for like a quirk. I gotta say, I would love, this would be amazing if it was on medium format, but it's just, it can't. I can't do this. I can't walk around with that camera and be ready for it. So it's always just happenstance. And the other thing that's really weird is that when you're on a plane, you're sitting next to somebody, and then you're trying to take a picture of like the seat or something right in front of them. And if you have a huge camera like this, it's really annoying and people get really weirded out. So it's much easier if you just have a small camera rather than some monster. So it's also a bit more subtle. So I shoot it with the Leica-a just because it's more polite.
And you're using a macro lens for the in-cabin shots, right? And then
sometimes I travel with 3 lenses. Again, rules. I have a 24 millimeter wide, which is really handy inside a cabin, because sometimes it's amazing, that space. I mean, it's to me and you guys on the computer, it's less, that seat back in front of you. So having a wide angle option is great. I always have that 90 macro. It's that f4 90 macro with the adapter, and that's great. And then I also have a 50 Summicron version 4, which I'm quite happy with, because it's special because it's silver and people really like it. But I use between that one, the 50 millimeter and the 90, that's probably the majority of the cabin shots. And those are just also my walk around lenses. I try to keep it down to 3 lenses. And that's keep it simple.
So obviously you mentioned that everything was shot on film for this. So
sort of. Yes and no,
right,
but
we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But for the images that you ultimately did choose, they were Portra?
Yeah. All my commercial work is on Portra 400. There's a little bit on 800, but let's call it 400. I mean, we could really get into this, but yeah, that's a fantastic film. I use it for everything else, and so it's just easier for me to transfer everything over to my Leica on the same film stock on Portra 400. So, and it's great for everything. And now I'm pushing it. I should also say that this is also kind of techie, but my new system, well, in the last 5 years, is I shoot Portra 400 rated at 1600 and I push it 2 stops. So I love the saturation and how it handles that. And you will see it also like on these images, particularly on the contrails on the sky side. You can see like the grain is a little bit out of whack, and the colors are like not normal. Like they're kind of souped up. But I would say that comes from the processing and the pushing. But that was something else that came out over the years of working on this, because I am probably getting ahead of myself, but originally when I first started this, I was in college. It was 2000 to 04. Of course, I was shooting everything on film. Then by 2004, I was shooting digital. Along with this project, it was a Canon digital camera that went with me everywhere, and that's what I had on this. And then this project sort of it just kind of floundered for a while. But then when I went back to shooting on film around 2012 for all of my commercial work as well, I likewise, all my personal work was back shooting film as well. And it just all of a sudden, everything started to come together at that point, because now the way it looked, and I'm normally very careful to say this because a lot of times I'm talking about why do I shoot my commercial work on film, and I'm very quick to say it's not really how it looks, because you can spend thousands of dollars or whatever it is for a retoucher and make any digital file look like film. And it was always about the intention and sort of the process of having limitations with the film. But specifically on this project, it's very much about how it looks and the way that the film scans, the way the film colors come out, and it looks, yeah, I mean, it's not quite real. If you look at the stuff that I shot on digital along this project, it's not the same at all. It doesn't look, it's not as dramatic. So that's, yeah, one big reason that film is a necessity on this project. All this film is scanned. It's like, so I process it, and I'm not making darkroom prints of it. I'm scanning it on a Noritsu. It used to be on a Sigma. That Sigma scanner is no longer in production. That thing was awesome. Nobody uses it anymore. Everyone uses Noritsus now for the roll scans. And I've become accustomed to how the Noritsu works and how it makes 35mm Portra 400 film when it's pushed 2 stops. I've figured out a formula that I really like. The 35mm, but if I shoot it on medium format, the same Portra 400, because the film, Megan, you might know it more than I, but like it's a different depth. The Noritsu records the medium format film like better, like qualitatively better, or but I don't like the colors because the colors are too accurate. So again, there's a whole bunch of accidents that have led to this project through its iterations of shooting. I mean, in 2003, I was shooting this on Fuji Velvia, just because that was when we were kids. That was what we all shot, like transparency, 50 ISO. Portrait wasn't even around, so it's all just. And then I did Canon digital 5D. That was what I was shooting, and then I kind of settled accidentally on this portrait, and like then I saw it. I'm like, now it's something. Now I really like it.
Yeah, it just kind of spoke to you for the project, I guess.
Yeah.
When exactly was the point where you were like, okay, it's book time? What was that starting point for you?
I think I probably, this project is definitely one that just keeps going and going and going. And it wasn't until David Laspina at Roman Numerals, who he knew me for 20 years. He's known, or he knew of the work, I think, obliquely, but he hadn't seen it in an updated form until about 4 years ago. And it wasn't until he sort of said to me, you know, you've got something here. Like, you know, this is a complete thought now. That's when I sort of had the validation to consider it as a project, as a book that could exist on its own, and also just to sort of redouble my efforts to really think about this, because I hate to say, but because this was always on such a slow burn, and I had tried a few times in around 2008 to put this together in a portfolio or a book, and it wasn't quite right. I don't think I had really given it enough energy or thought, but it was when David at Roman numerals had a look at it in its iteration, like I said, that would have been around 2017 even. That gave me the impetus or the confidence to consider it up to par. You know, and it was like, oh, okay, so like Roman numerals, I mean, have a look at what they do, and it's like, oh, so this is big time. This is great. Like this is really. But he also, I think he shared an interest in the concept. So I think, and again, in that sort of whimsical fascination of just looking at aircraft from the ground and not ever really getting used to the fact that air travel is kind of a superpower that we can all share, and it's nothing to become too accustomed to. And so I found, I guess I sort of accidentally found the right home for it, where it resonated.
So when it comes to actually putting the book together, what do you think came first, actually sequencing the diptychs, or do you think actually the layout process? So you're printing, you know, the book style, what came first in that process?
I had a few pairs that were definites, but when Roman numerals came, they had a template that they didn't require me to stick to, but they had a basic concept with their series that every year they do, basically just a printing of a series that all their books, all their titles, no matter the subject matter, has this. Well, it's the way that this book sort of looks now. It's paper bound, it's or perfect bound, and it has a staple. Is very, very simple. So that alleviated a lot of my choice of thinking, you know, my goodness, how to present this, how to do the binding, because it could have been any number of ways, and this was sort of a very I don't want to say inauspicious, but just a very simple concept for the binding, and that helped immensely. It was like, fine, get it out, but also it works really whenever it helped me, because anytime you're dealing with a book that has to open up, that you really need to see both sides. It's a problem with any kind of binding. It never is going to lay flat. But with this book, because it's so I don't want to say that it's so malleable, but it's I mean, it's small, it's easy to work with. You feel like you're not destroying it if you lay it out and look at it. It's easier just to look at, like physically in your hands, and you don't feel like you're destroying the spine of the book. I don't want to. It's a sort of a precious size book. It's nothing monumental, but it doesn't. The book itself doesn't feel like you have to treat it with white cotton gloves or anything. So you can actually you can see the work, and that's all I wanted to do, because I was always like, I think I need to just, you know, maybe this is just a box of prints, and that's the only way this can be presented. So when Roman numerals came along, and they, you know, we have this general template that we try to adhere to, I was like, sign me up. It makes sense. I'm totally happy with it. So I was able to, the general process in that I built from the few pairs that I knew that were definitely going to work. And then as I continued to have this sort of Tetris game, that was, you know, first the files were on my computer, and then I printed out little prints and putting them around. And I think there's a various amount of success to those layouts, because there's quite a few images that could go with others, and that's, I hate to say it, but that's still very much ongoing, and that's also going to be fine. You know, it's kind of the fun, because it feels like a puzzle. So, and I think some work better than others. Some rely on shapes to resonate with one another. Some are colors, and sometimes you switch it around. But at least here I have it in a book, and it's a complete thought, and it's done.
Are
Nice.
do the Roman numerals books, none of them have text in it, or was that your decision?
Some of them do. That's this is how I've tried to. I have an introduction. Like there is a project description to this, and the problem was with this one how to put it in on the paper that I wanted for the cover with this, because then I wanted the bells and whistles, and the cover was a little bit more fancy because we had it debossed, and I wanted that, but then that precluded any ability to write or to put anything on the inside. And then because I was running out of space with how successful physically, how much the book can bend with a staple, there's a limitation. And then maybe I put in too many images and I couldn't have an introduction. And then it was like, well, do you want to have the introduction and the words to it, or do you want to have the photos? And I said, let's just have the photos. The introduction, if you really want to know, if you want me to hear about it, well, then you can call me and I can tell you about it for an hour.
You
I
should have
like
at
that
least
though
put your
because
phone number.
it allows the viewer to form their own relationship to the body of work. So it's different. It's a different way of approaching a project. So I think that's
Yeah,
valuable.
I also really wanted it to just begin. I wanted it to be completely about having a visual rhythm, just like bang, 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 snare drum, bang. Like just a little bit of a rhythm just with the images. And in some ways, I find the whole idea in the project, I find it very playful. And I wanted it to be, I think that's maybe what I was trying to say about like what the Contrail, and the whole series with Roman numerals. I find that the book and the size, it's playful, it's whimsical, it's not irreverent, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that the pairs I think it's fun. Like it's a fun thing. If you read the introduction and the description, I start to use like a whole bunch of 10-point words and like that's cool, and I want that to get across, but it's yeah, blah blah blah.
At the heart of it, you're still the 7-year-old boy looking up at the plane,
Yeah,
being like,
yeah,
wow, yeah,
yeah.
and that
So
carries
exactly, exactly.
through.
Just
Do you
that.
feel like your relationship to this project is more about the visual impact of it, or do you also feel like there's something emotional behind it too? Like she said, like being kind of like a kid looking up at the sky, like what is that emotional connection to you?
Yes and yes. The book as an object, I just want it to be that visual experience. If you want to hear about it though, but that's why, and then it's just a book, it's just the object. And if you want that concept, if you still are not satisfied enough, if you want to have I don't know, the second course on the whole thing, then that will be available online. It will be, I will put a little note card inside the book and you can read it, and that will maybe, that will add an added value. But certainly for me, yes, I'm still very much enthused by that, the concept of, again, trying to be in two places at once, looking up at the sky, not being in the sky and looking down at the ground, and knowing that there's people looking back at you and it's going back and forth 1,000 different times. But I just try to explain it now. I could write that in the intro and it maybe is inelegant. So yes, I want the object just to be purely about your eyes.
Do you have any other plans for Contrail? Any other iterations? Any other forms? Maybe a large prints or a show, or any.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, this is something that's sort of very much ongoing, and I do approach it. It feels like fishing, and every time you go out, like, ooh, what can I get this time? Like maybe I'm gonna, and then you kind of don't want to get anything that good because then it's just gonna screw up the whole everything else. And it's like, oh God, I got something, and it's like, oh, now I have to redo everything. But so now I am working with a bookmaker to make a presentation case, just like um, because I want a way to present the book with I have now new diptychs, new pairs that are not in the book that I feel bad about because I'm really excited about them, and I'm continuing to make new things, and I'm having those pairs, which are essentially the same size as the images in the book, but they are printed They are in float frames, and they are, I think, in another equally beautiful presentation that I also want to share, and I want that to be there. So, but because the whole thing is very small, I can make this presentation box contain the framed pair that's not seen in the book, plus this book. And it's and the book, the box itself is really special because I'm wrapping it all with these aeronautical maps, which really aren't in production anymore because they are they're the maps that the commercial pilots would have in their briefcase, basically, so that when they get lost and they have to call up air traffic control, they have the number for which air traffic control place to call up and say, I'm on heading such and such, and what's the frequency here? Normally, they should never need them, but these are the maps that they used to have, and now all those maps are on iPads, and all that stuff is just sitting there in their briefcase, but it's all digital. So these maps, and I have these things left over. They're all from the 80s and the 90s, and they're such beautiful objects. I always wanted to do something with it. I wanted to make wallpaper with them, and but now I figured out a way that I can make a box. And it's just, again, Ashlyn, back to your idea about, I don't know, the emphasis on it. It's a equally beautiful object with just the maps, and then the frame and the prints. So it just trying to hit on as many levels as I'm inspired by the things surrounding it. So though, yeah, it's the concept, it's the object, it's all of that, but there's no captions inside.
Okay. Wait, before we wrap up, I have two quick bonus questions that I thought of. One is, what is the light like inside of a plane when you're shooting photography? Is it different because it's a different experience of the sun?
Yeah, well, the trick is to try to book yourself on earlier evening flights, so you know you're going to get that sideways light early in the morning where it's coming in. And the thing is, I've done that so many times. I have so many redundant images of light just coming in through the windows. So you have to pick and choose, and then it's really hard, and you're splitting hairs. So there's always those moments, or like there's things that happen, like, you know, when you bank, like if the plane is coming into landing or taking off and it's doing its holding pattern or whatever, like be ready, because that's when, as one side of the aircraft goes up and the sun's up, you know the light's going to come down, it's going to hit something really weird, and it's going to be crazy. So that's another thing that you have to, or that I enjoy, you know, being aware of. Oftentimes now, though, like all the new planes, they have really fancy blue, pink lights. It's like a club inside, so it's something new.
Okay, and the other one is, are a lot of the contrails specific flight patterns that we're looking at, or like, do you know where those planes were going or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't know where they were going specifically, but I do know like a lot of them. I did a lot of the work comes from Northern England and Yorkshire, which is where my parents live, and also Northern Italy, which is where my partner's parents live. And as it happens, those two places happen to be under flight paths with a lot of intersecting flights. Whereas, like, I live in New York, but here they're all going in the same direction. All of them are going, like, normally the ones here that are already at altitude, this gets really boring, but they're all going to Europe on the same heading. But in certain places, like Northern England and Northern Italy, you're under places where you have planes going every which way, and that's a really productive place to shoot contrails, where you get a lot of cool patterns. So that's helpful, but I don't know, I can't tell you exactly, oh, that flight was going where. But now, again, you know, with these apps, you can kind of, if you're quick enough, you can go and punch in and see where something's going, but that's also not captioned. I won't be able to do that. That's a step too far.
Yeah, I agree.
So you kind of jarred a question, just a quick one. What are people's reactions that you're sitting next to, like when you've got your camera, like you were like, be ready. Like, to me, I'm thinking as a passenger, the guy next to me doing what you're doing, what are their reactions to you?
I'll tell you, this is, I'm not even going to say this because you work for Leica, but I will tell you, and that Meagan, you work with film, but this is a true, I feel bad even saying this because you're like, oh man, he's being bought by these guys. If you, like, anytime, if you start just taking pictures like of another person's lap, it's like, oh, I really like your seatbelt. I like how that like is going, like, it's really weird. So if you start though by you bring out the camera, and it's like some people are like, ooh, like Leica, like, or they're like, that looks weird, or that's cool, or it's like is that a really old camera? I'm like, no, it's still in production, it's actually brand new, but it can take lenses built from 1954. But then the best thing is then you take out the roll of film or you put it back in. So I normally, when you're just sitting down, I make sure that I do it in such a way that it's not that discreet, that I'm loading the film so that I'm sure that they're like, oh, he's serious, or like, oh, look at this, or look at this hipster like shooting film or whatever. But normally that will start a conversation. The film goes into the camera, start winding it really loud, take a few shots, or normally I have to advance the film to shot 20, so it's like bang, 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 and people are like, whoa, what is this dude doing? And at that point, then everybody's on side. You can do whatever, and you can say like, oh, like, I really like your seatbelt, can I photograph it?
Nice entry point to being creepy.
Interesting.
Yeah, or that.
Yeah.
Also, if anybody else wants to see, this might also be somewhere near where this video lives, but your website's michaelturek.com.
That's me.
At Michael Turek on Instagram. Check out all the other great things that you're doing. It's a great book. I have it right here.
I'm glad it arrived. Oh, very cool.
Thank you for talking with us about it, Michael. I'm excited to see how else it might live from here, but great work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to watch this space, I suppose. We're, as in this day and age, hopefully we can get back on planes soon and continue doing some more stuff.